one understanding that a lot of people have about Joseph Smith's relationship with Fanny Alger, and which I actually thought at one point, is that at the time that the relationship began, Fanny Alger was 15 years old, living in the Smith home and 15 years old. So that idea that Fanny was 15 at the time that the relationship began comes from a source that Todd Compton used extensively, written by Mosiah Hancock. And Mosiah Hancock was a first cousin to Fanny Alger. He says in 1896 that Fanny was married to Joseph Smith by Mosiah Hancock's father, Levi Hancock, Fanny's uncle, that Levi Hancock performed the ceremony, and that the ceremony was done around the same time that Levi Hancock had married his own wife, Clarissa Reed, in early 1833. If that were the case, then Fanny Alger would have been 15 at the time the relationship began. Many people have actually used this source to argue that she was 15, getting that information from Mosiah Hancock. Then, interestingly, they have separated what he says about the timing of the relationship from what he says about the nature of the relationship. Because Mosiah Hancock is crystal clear that he, as her first cousin, understood the relationship to have been a marriage performed with a ceremony by Levi Hancock. And yet, often when people circulate this information, they only circulate the date that he gave for the marriage while leaving out the fact that he said it was a marriage. And so what they present is, well, Joseph Smith had an adulterous affair with a 15-year-old living in his home. Well, where are they getting that from? That's absolutely not what Mosiah Hancock says. He's quite explicit that there was a marriage, and he believes the marriage was in early 1833. Now, when we look at Mosiah Hancock's information in its context, and we look at details of it, there actually are problems with his account of when the marriage occurred. He's writing about events that occurred before his own birth, and making a lot of assumptions that there was a kind of polygamous culture already existing in the church in Ohio in 1833, and there was not. It was very much a monogamous culture. There are a lot of holes in his account, and I've written about this in a couple places, published on it. There are others who have similarly analyzed his account and thought, okay, his account's valuable, but it's not to be relied on in all of its details. So if Mosiah Hancock doesn't necessarily know the date for the marriage, where would we turn for information about the date? Well, interestingly, Mosiah Hancock writes his account of the marriage as an addendum to his father's autobiography. This is interesting, right? So his father, before he passes away, Levi Hancock, writes an autobiography, and he actually mentions Fanny Alger in it, and he mentions Joseph Smith in relationship with Fanny Alger. He says that at one point, Joseph told him to take Fanny Alger and take her to Missouri, away from Kirtland to Missouri. The best evidence that we have is this was when their relationship had been discovered. It was causing a public fuss. So Joseph wanted Fanny to be taken away from town so that the sort of public fuss, the rumors, would stop. So the benchmark that Levi Hancock gives us for understanding when the relationship was is summer of 1836. Now, if the relationship had begun early in 1833, that would mean that a plural marriage in the Joseph and Emma Smith home would have had to have been going on under Emma's nose for 3.5 years. When we look at contemporaneous sources from the 1840s in Nauvoo, when there were plural wives living in the Smith home, we see that actually Emma was extremely vigilant about all this. She was keeping track of where Joseph was, where the plural wife, like Emily Partridge, was, right? The idea that a marriage was occurring under her nose for 3.5 years in the 1830s just does not compute. It doesn't fit what we actually see in the Smith family. And when we look for indications of when the marriage was occurring, our best indications from Levi Hancock and others like Eliza R. Snow are that it was happening in 1836. So for instance, Eliza R. Snow leaves an account in 1886 where she talks about living in the Joseph and Emma Smith home at the same time that Fanny Alger was there. And she says that Joseph's relationship with Fanny Alger occurred at that time, which would place it in 1836. And I've got other indications, other sources that dovetail together to indicate that that's when the marriage occurred. One of these sources that we have that helps us understand both the nature of Joseph and Fanny's relationship and the timing of that relationship, we have letters from a woman named Eliza Jane Churchill Webb. So Eliza Webb was a resident of Kirtland, Ohio, and she's actually the woman that when Fanny Alger was kicked out of the Smith home because Emma did not like the fact that there was a plural marriage going on between Joseph and Fanny, Fanny Alger went and stayed with Eliza Webb. And Eliza Webb writes letters later where she says, I do not know that the sealing of plural marriages, she means, commenced in Kirtland, but I am convinced that something of the kind began in Kirtland, and my judgment is based principally on what Fanny Alger herself told me. So we only know of, although there were a lot of rumors, a lot of sources relying on rumor about the nature of the relationship, we have an account from the one person who says Fanny Alger told her directly about the relationship. And she says that based on what Fanny Alger told her, she thinks that polygamous sealing, or she says something very much like it, started in Kirtland. And her account gives other clues that also point to 1836 as the year that the relationship both began and ended. So the 1836 timing of Joseph Smith's relationship with Fanny Alger, which is attested by Levi Hancock, Eliza R. Snow, and Eliza Webb, indicates that Joseph is practicing polygamy several years after it's first revealed to him while he's doing his prophetic revision of Genesis in 1831. And we have strong evidence that the relationship began after the April 3rd, 1836 coming of Elijah to Joseph Smith and Alvar Cowdery at the Kirtland Temple with the keys to sealing. And so Joseph and Fanny's relationship could have actually been a sealed plural marriage, sealed under that authority from the start.